Welcome to the information series, Air Quality Regulations for Stationary Engines. This module provides a detailed discussion of requirements for existing emergency engines. So Eric, how does EPA define an existing emergency engine?
Well, an emergency engine is one that provides electrical power or mechanical work during an emergency, such as a fire, a flood, or power outage. And an existing engine is defined as one that was constructed before June 12, 2006.
And the construction date is the date the owner entered into a contractual obligation for the on-site installation of the engine.
That's right, and that stays the same even if the engine has to be moved.
So Eric, let's talk about operational limits for emergency engines.
Well, assuming an owner or operator has determined that their engine meets the definition of existing and emergency, there are some operational limits to consider. In a true emergency, such as a flood or fire or power outage, there's no limit to the amount of hours that they can run the engine.
Okay.
However, in any other situation that's not a true emergency, the following operational limits apply. An emergency engine is limited to 100 hours per calendar year of runtime for maintenance and testing, for an emergency demand response when an energy emergency alert level 2 has been declared by the reliability coordinator, or during operation when the voltage or frequency deviates by 5% or more below the standard. Now, 50 of that 100-hour allocation can be used for operation in non-emergency situations. However, with one exception, you can't use that 50 hours for peak shaving or to supply power as part of a financial arrangement with another entity. Now, an example of that financial arrangement would be, say the engine owner receives payment or a lower electricity rate from his utility in exchange for operating the engine during times of peak power demand. Now, the one exception where the 50 hours can be used to supply power as part of a financial arrangement with another entity is if the engine operates during situations where all of the following conditions are met. The engine's an existing engine at an area source. It's dispatched by a local transmission or distribution system operator. The dispatch is meant to mitigate local transmission or distribution limitations to avert potential voltage collapse or line overloads. The dispatch follows reliability, emergency operation, or similar protocols that follow specific NERC, regional, state, public utility commission, or local standards or guidelines. The engine provides power only to a facility or to support local distribution systems, and the owner identifies and records the dispatch and standard that is being followed. If an engine's operation time exceeds all of these limits, then the engine is considered a non-emergency engine, and owners must then comply with the standards for that category.
Let's talk about compliance requirements for emergency engines. If someone owns an emergency engine, what must they do to comply with EPA's air quality regulations?
Well, they'll need to change the oil in the oil filter and inspect the hoses and the belts every 500 hours or annually. Then, depending on the engine type, there are some additional requirements. For compression ignition engines, the air cleaner needs to be inspected. For spark ignition engines, the spark plugs need to be inspected every 1,000 hours or annually. Instead of changing the oil every 500 hours or annually, owners of spark ignition engines can use the oil analysis program to check their oil's quality. Then they must also operate or maintain their engine according to the manufacturer's instructions or according to an owner-developed maintenance plan.
What about startup and idle time?
Well, they need to minimize the startup and idle time for the engine. They also need to use a non-resettable hour meter to record the hours of operation and to keep records of those hours of operation and maintenance.
Do those records need to be submitted to EPA?
No, they don't, except for certain emergency engines, which we'll talk about later.
You just mentioned the oil analysis program. What exactly is that?
Well, it's an alternative set of criteria that owners can use to determine whether their oil needs to be changed or not.
Must the oil analysis be performed at the same frequency as specified for the oil changes?
Yes, it does. And if the analysis fails to meet certain limits, then the oil needs to be changed within 2 business days.
And what are those limits?
Well, the limits are the percentage of water content by volume is greater than 0.5. The viscosity of the oil changed by more than 20% from the viscosity when it was new. For spark ignition engines, the total acid number increased by more than 3 milligrams of potassium hydroxide per gram from the total acid number of the oil when new. And for compression ignition engines, the total base number is less than 30% of the total base number when the oil was new.
So if operators choose to use this analysis, then they must keep records of it, correct?
Correct.
And what do people need to do with the records they're required to keep?
Well, they're required to submit a report to EPA if the engine is 100 horsepower or greater. Plus, if the engine is operated or contractually obligated to be available greater than 15 hours per year, up to 100 hours, for emergency demand response or voltage frequency deviation, or operated for local reliability, up to 50 hours per year. If their engine doesn't fall into that category, they're not required to submit a report to EPA.
Okay, and then beginning in 2015, they must file that electronically, right?
Right, they're required to submit the report electronically by March 31st of the following year.
Okay, and then what needs to be included in these reports?
Well, it should include the facility name and address, the engine rating, model year, latitude, longitude, the date, start time, and the end time for operation, the number of hours the engine is contractually obligated for emergency demand response or voltage frequency deviation, the name of the entity that dispatched the engine for local reliability and the situation that necessitated the dispatch, and any deviations from fuel requirements.
And this electronic report is submitted through the Compliance and Emissions Data Reporting Interface.
Right, through EPA's CDX.
So Eric, are there any other requirements?
Yes, there are fuel requirements. If people own an emergency compression ignition engine that is greater than 100 horsepower, has a displacement less than 30 liters per cylinder, and is operated or contractually obligated to be available for more than 15 hours per year, up to 100 hours per year, for emergency demand response or voltage frequency deviation, or is operated for local reliability up to 50 hours per year, then there's a fuel requirement you must follow.
Okay, so beginning January 1st, 2015, owners of these engines must use the ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel.
That's right, but if they have fuel already in their inventory that they haven't used up as of January 1st, 2015, they can use that up before they have to purchase the low sulfur fuel.
Okay, now let's cover the dates for compliance.
Well, the compliance date for compression ignition engines was May 2013, and for spark ignition engines, the compliance date was October 19th, 2013. Now, both of those dates have passed, so it's important for any owners or operators who haven't complied with the regulation to get in contact with their EPA regional office as soon as possible.
And the list of contacts is listed on the screen right now. Eric, thank you so much for going over the air regulation requirements for the existing emergency engines. And now in Module 3, we'll cover the requirements for the existing non-emergency engines.